Good afternoon and welcome to NTD Canada News Election Special Series. I'm your host, Gary Bai. Over the past weekend, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was forced to delay his event due to security concerns as protesters followed him wherever he went. The new mandate will not come without legal challenges, said some experts. Our courts and lawmakers will have to decide whether vaccination requirements are going against our constitutional freedom of rights, beliefs, and liberties. Criminal justice issues like gun control are rarely talking points in election campaigns in Canada. They're complex and there are no blanket solutions. How Canadians vote will drastically impact their gun ownership rights and how criminals are prosecuted. It's day 15 of this election campaign and their polls show that for the first time in 18 months, the Conservatives are ahead of the pack with 32.9%. On Saturday, Jagmeet Singh visited the University of Sudbury on a campaign stop. He promised if elected, he would immediately remove the interest on federal student loans. While in the Maritimes this weekend, Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole said his plan to reduce emissions is achievable and would not cripple the economy. He said a Conservative government would commit to the target first set by former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. It seems Justin Trudeau's weekend ended exactly as it began. On Friday at a campaign event in Bolton, Ontario, angry crowds outnumbered police and the event had to be cancelled. On Sunday, another event in Cambridge, Ontario was delayed for an hour after crowds protesting Trudeau's mandatory vaccination policies honked horns and heckled at him. It was only once talked about and now it has become a stark reality soon after Trudeau pledged to make vaccination mandatory in the federal government work environment days before election was called. Vaccine passports are now making their way into 3 provinces in the coming weeks for many universities and open private enterprises. However, the new mandates will not come without legal challenges, said some experts. Our courts and lawmakers will have to decide whether vaccination requirements are going against our constitutional freedom of rights, beliefs, and liberties. Employment lawyer Lior Samfiru, appearing on Global's morning show, said, "It is important to remember that for most private enterprises, this practice is still not legal. These policies could pose potential human rights violations for employees who are forced to be vaccinated by their employers." On August 23rd, British Columbia announced that anyone over the 12 years of age will require proof of vaccination beginning September 13th at public places like recreational facilities and restaurants, including indoor organized gatherings such as weddings, conferences, and sporting events. The vaccine requirement will be in effect until January 31st, 2022 in BC and could be extended. Manitoba is requiring all their provincial employees who work with vulnerable populations to be fully immunized by October 13th or to have the option to undergo regular testing, while Quebec's mandatory vaccination passports for essential services will come into full effect on September 1st. Other provinces could impose mandates similar to those set by Quebec, Manitoba, and BC. Lorian Hartcastle, an associate professor of law at the University of Calgary, told the Epoch Times, "Each province that follows suit bolsters the chances the court will allow all of them to continue, but also means governmental responses must both prevent harm and not unduly cause it. A court might be more likely to uphold a vaccine mandate that is time-limited or is linked to achieving particular benchmarks because, of course, courts don't like complete limits on rights or absolute limits on rights. They prefer more carefully tailored plans," she said. Lisa Bildy, interim president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, told the Epoch Times that such measures infringe on Canadians' constitutional rights. Imposing coercive vaccine mandates infringes on many of the sections set out in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, like in Section 7, describing the liberty and security of the person, and Section 2A, freedom of conscience and religion. Bildy said the onus is on governments to prove that these mandates are demonstrably justified based on credible evidence about the efficacy of the vaccines and the actual risks posed by COVID-19. However, she added that the nature of government's blanket mandates suggests other problems in justifying the appropriateness of their response. As a blanket mandate issued by a government, they're illogical and very likely unconstitutional. Bildy noted that it's becoming more evident the vaccines don't stop transmission of the virus, and a better approach would be to use them as a therapeutic for those who are vulnerable or elderly to keep them safer from severe outcomes. If they do not stop transmission, then vaccine passports serve no rational connection to their stated purpose other than the punitive targeting of those who, for whatever reason, have chosen not to take the vaccine, she said. They will also serve to further divide an already polarized society and lead to increased hostilities that could bubble over into actual conflict if we're not careful. Some campuses in Nova Scotia, Ontario, and Saskatchewan are requiring vaccination. The BC mandate requires that post-secondary students be vaccinated to access on-campus housing. The use of coercive and intimidating tactics in threatening to destroy students' education and career prospects if they do not submit and receive the new COVID-19 vaccine is unethical and unlawful, Justice Center staff lawyer Alison Pejovic said in a press release. We'll fiercely defend these women and their right to bodily integrity and the freedom to choose what medical treatment they undertake, without the fear of being denied their education. In a free country, individuals are entitled to choose what they inject into their own bodies. Now moving on to how the public is responding to vaccination mandates on the political front. Apart from having a majority of supporters in this federal election showing up at their events, cheering and greeting their party leaders, they have found instead themselves facing some major resistance in protests from citizens. Over the past week and into the weekend, Prime Minister Trudeau met with much opposition from concerned and angry Canadians on the matter of the government's choice of mandating vaccines across the nation. If re-elected on September 20th, the federal Liberals will make vaccination mandatory for all federal public service employees as early as the end of September, as well as for employees and passengers in federally regulated air, rail, and marine transportation sectors, including travel on cruise ships, by the end of October, said Lee Harding, a journalist and think tank researcher. Instead of requiring vaccination, Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole said his government would require unvaccinated public servants to take daily rapid COVID-19 tests, while unvaccinated passengers would have to take rapid tests before boarding a plane, a train, or cruise ship. O'Toole said that this was a reasonable and balanced approach that respects the right of Canadians to make personal health decisions. O'Toole said that Canadians do not want to see the politicization of the pandemic. Vaccines are not a political issue, he said. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, meanwhile, stands firmly in favor of a vaccine mandate for federal workers, though he has criticized Trudeau for a lack of details in his plan. Singh has also called for domestic vaccine passports and mandatory vaccine rules to be in place by Labor Day. Criminal justice issues like gun control are rarely talking points in election campaigns in Canada. They're complex and there are no blanket solutions. How Canadians vote will drastically impact their gun ownership rights and how criminals are prosecuted. The Liberal Party hasn't released a full election platform as of the past weekend. However, it will presumably continue to drive forward policies similar to two previously introduced bills pertaining to criminal justice, Bill C-21 and C-22, which were introduced in February. Bill C-21 would further restrict long guns, increase maximum penalties for nonviolent firearm crimes, and simplify gun confiscation. Liberals also proposed a mass buyback of assault weapons banned last year, which, according to a report by the Parliamentary Budget Officer, would cost Canadian taxpayers $756 million. In a statement, the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights calls C-21 electioneering, saying that the provisions in the bill wouldn't increase public safety. Meanwhile, gun control advocates call the bill unsatisfactory, saying that stronger gun control measures than those proposed in the bill are needed. Bill C-22 would reverse provisions for mandatory minimum sentencing for over 20 crimes, such as drug offenses and gun-related crimes, and ensure Indigenous and Black Canadians are not disproportionately impacted by the tough sentences. On the Conservative Party side, it is the only party with detailed gun control mandates outlined on its election platform as of the past weekend. In terms of gun policies, the party said it will work to keep firearms out of the hands of criminals and respect the legitimate rights of legal firearm owners. The proposed provisions include mandatory minimum sentences for the illegal use and trafficking of firearms, hiring an additional 200 RCMP officers to combat firearm smuggling, implementing safer storage guidelines, and expanding the firearms tracing and enforcement database nationally. In addition, the Conservative Party said it will repeal Bill C-71, a legislation introduced by the Liberals in 2019 intended to impose a ban on the use, sale, and importation of more than 1,500 types of assault weapons. The Conservatives claim that their firearm policies contrast with those of the Liberal Party that they said, quote, refuse to take action against gangs while harassing hunters and sport shooters. The People's Party proposes to repeal the entire Firearms Act and replace it with a system with one that they said will prioritize punishing criminals. It proposed provisions that would remove restrictions targeting sport shooters, protect property rights of illegal gun owners, and give Parliament exclusive authority to change firearm regulations. Lastly, the Green Party proposes further restrictions on handgun usage and would run a payback program, while the NDP proposes funding for anti-gang programs to curb gang violence. In the August 25th episode, we presented the party's plans to tackle the housing crisis. Yesterday, we interviewed Dr. Yin Lee, an associate professor at Carleton University Sprout School of Business, on the subject. He believes that the reason that the housing is so expensive in parts of Canada is due to the restrictions imposed on urban expansion.
Where, people move out to the edges of the city, and then the city gets bigger on the edges and sprawls out. And this is true, it does. That's been going on from the very beginning of the origins of Canada. If you look at any city 150 years ago in China or Canada or the US or Europe, it was a much smaller city, and then the city grew in circles around the core. That's just been going on forever. But now some city councils across Canada have said this is bad for the environment and this is causing urban sprawl. And so they have limited the growth of cities. And it was an extraordinarily short-sighted, poor policy choice, because what it did was it restricted the supply of housing. But if the population continues to grow, you aren't solving the problem. You're making the problem worse.
He said that foreign buyers are not the root cause of the housing crisis, and demand-oriented policies are not the solution, and that shortage of housing is the real reason behind the housing crisis. He commented on Erin O'Toole's policy of building 1 million new homes.
Well, he's proposing selling off, or about the largest owner of land in Canada is the government of Canada. And so he's proposing selling off surplus government of Canada land to real estate developers to build more houses. So if he does it, if he gets elected and does it, that's a very good idea. We need more houses. We are 1.8 million houses short of what our population needs. We need to build many, many, many more homes. That is the solution to the crisis.
He also commented that the NDP is focusing on the demand side and the Liberals want to retrofit houses.
The NDP and the Liberal focus, in my judgment, more on providing assistance to buyers, which is the demand side. And I don't believe we have a demand side problem. They're saying, well, some people don't have enough money to buy the house. Well, that's because the houses are too expensive. The houses are too expensive because there's a shortage of houses. And so my criticism of the NDP is they're trying to focus more on the demand side to make it easier for a person to buy a house. I don't believe that's the problem. The problem is a shortage of houses. And the Liberals are proposing to retrofit a lot of existing houses. But the problem isn't retrofitting existing houses. The problem is we're short 1.8 million houses. We need to build more houses all across Canada, starting in Vancouver.
So what do the numbers say? Day 15 of this election, and the polls show that for the first time in 18 months, the Conservatives are ahead of the pack with 32.9%. The Liberals are on a downward slide at 31.8%, and the trend is expected to continue with the forecasted losses to increase as campaigning continues. However, polls show that the Liberals will most likely retain control of the government, but with fewer than the current number of seats. The NDP is still maintaining its 20% with the possibility of making gains in the coming weeks. The Bloc Québécois is at 6.1% and the Greens at 4% have less support now than they did in 2019. The newcomers, the People's Party, sits at 4.3% nationally. Across Canada, while the Conservatives are making the biggest gains, they are still the strongest in British Columbia and the Prairies. The Liberals, while strongest in Atlantic Canada, Ontario, and Quebec, are trending downward with losses growing in BC, the Prairies, Ontario, and Quebec. Some of those losses are gains for the NDP that has been making its strongest showings in BC and in the Prairies. The Greens are polling no better than 7% anywhere and are behind the People's Party in Alberta, the Prairies, and Ontario. With that said, thank you for watching NTD Canada News. If you like this video, please give us a like and share. It will help more people see our channel. We'll be back with more comprehensive election coverage, and we'll see you next time.